sustainability enthusiast and social entrepreneur, the founder of the social enterprise The Tiny Plastic Factory, an organisation that's purpose is to accelerate the transition of the New Zealand plastics industry toward a circular economy. He's regularly involved in climate action and circular economy related events such as Climathon, repair cafes, waste-free huis, and supporting community workshops and makerspaces. He's a creative maverick. I like it. We should have played some Top Gun theme tune. Who specialises in innovating new products and systems for the future and is rarely seen without a bicycle. Well, good man. If you're on a bike, you've got to be a good human. Anyway, right. Round of applause for Darcy. Over to you, sir.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, and for that very warm welcome, Tim. Yes, as mentioned, my name is Darcy Snell. I am the founder and operations manager of social enterprise The Tiny Plastic Factory. Today, I will be talking to you about plastics and circular economy. Now, I've only got half an hour. Normally, I can literally talk for hours on this. So this is the sort of crash course, very high level version. We might rip through things a little bit quickly, but try and stand with me and I'll try and keep it as engaging as possible. So first up, good old icebreaker. Here we've got a whole bunch of chemical molecules. Some of you might sort of know what these are. If you do know what they are, don't ruin it. Don't tell your friends. Don't say anything about it. So one of these molecules is a plastic. Molecules labeled 1 to 4, one is a plastic. All right, one of them is a plastic. If you think, I'm going to go through numbers 1 to 4, and if you think that number is plastic, I just want you to put your hand up, all right? Cool. So just going to go through molecule number 1. You think molecule number 1 is plastic, put your hand up. Here we go, we got one there. Anyone else? Another one? Yep, keep going. Cool, first one's always a bit cold. Right, second one. Is the second one a plastic? What do you think? Yep, cool, nice. Put a few hands up. Number 3. Yep, a few more. Nice one. And number 4. Cool, a few more. All right. So number 1 was a ethanol molecule. Sorry, number 1 is not a plastic, it's ethanol, which is actually an alcohol. Number 2, most of you are all pretty onto it. This is the plastic molecule called polyethylene terephthalate, or PET plastic, which is fairly common. You've probably heard of it at some point before. Number 3 is actually a glucose molecule. And number 4 is a molecule of cocaine. Cool. So the reason I've put this up as a bit of an icebreaker is basically to help tackle the one big question about plastic is like, what is it? You know, you think of it as material, just like metals. It's kind of a group of materials, plastics, metals. You know, there's woods. But often when we're talking about it, we don't actually sort of know like what the best way to define it is. And the most defining feature of any plastic as a material is that plastic are polymers. And to explain this, we do need to get a little bit nerdy and go down to this molecular level. So as you can see here, we've got an ethylene molecule on the left and a polyethylene molecule on the right. Now, if you don't really know what you're looking at, again, just try and stick with me. We'll get through some of this sort of black and white as quickly as possible. But yeah, basically, high level, all plastics are polymers. They are chain molecules made from repeating subunits called monomers. Think of these monomers like chain links. So on the left here, we've got ethylene. That is a monomer to polyethylene, which is the plastic polymer. So you can see that has got a couple of carbon atoms there and some hydrogen around it. And that then forms that larger chain molecule, polyethylene, which has got a bunch of carbon all the way through the middle and hydrogen surrounding them. That is often abbreviated in that sort of other little form you can see on the right there, where it's got the brackets. And that was the sort of hint from the previous one. Because plastics are polymers and they're these chain units, they're often abbreviated like that, as some of you somehow picked up. I'm very surprised how many of you got your hand up for that. Questions at the end, thank you though. Cool, so all plastics are hydrocarbon based. Aside from being polymers, this is the other very defining property. And if you're looking at plastics as a molecule, written on paper, this is how another way you'll determine that the material is indeed a plastic. So here we've got 3 examples, propylene, ethylene, and vinyl chloride. So these are all monomer forms of plastics. They haven't made their polymers yet, but this is just a good example. You can see they've all got their carbon atoms in the middle, and they're all surrounded mostly by hydrogen. So relatively simple at this point. Carbon and hydrogen atoms, is what these plastics are based around. Now, some other general properties of plastics, think, actually how they behave in the real world. They're usually solid at room temperature. This is probably fairly intuitive or obvious to most of you, but yeah, pretty much every time you encounter a plastic, it's in its solid form, not a liquid and certainly not gas. They're quite resistant to chemicals. So whenever you go and buy any kind of cleaning chemical or spray, etc., it's almost always in some kind of plastic container. One of the reasons for this is because it's very resistant to chemicals and is highly unlikely to react with anything that you're going to put in it. Third, we've got that they're great insulators and or poor conductors of heat and electricity. All of these cables I'm steering up here, all of the housings, the conduits that surround the metal internals of these cables are made of plastic. And one of those reasons is because they're a great insulator of electricity. And so those cables, those individual ones, aren't able to communicate with each other because they're separated by these plastic layers. Same goes for heat. You think of insulation when it's being put in houses, especially underfloor. Polystyrene, that puffed up foamy form of it called expanded polystyrene is often used for this because it is a great insulator of heat. Next up, we've got most plastics are lightweight but quite strong. So you think of a plastic bag and how thin that material is, but actually how much force or maybe in a more practical sense, how many groceries that bag can hold. They're also very durable and degrade slowly. Now, this is generally a great positive benefit. This is a material that we can make fairly easily and it lasts a really long time. But it also can be quite a negative thing, as we all know, because if and when plastic ends up in the environment or in landfill, it stays there for a very long time. And any kind of natural occurrences only break this down very slowly. And lastly, plastic is able to easily take on a variety of forms. So plastic can be made into relatively thick solid sheets. It can be made into bottles, bags, nets, fibers. Many clothings contain plastics made from a very thin plastic thread that's been spooled into beforehand. But in general, most plastics behave similarly, and they have these shared, often useful properties. The differences between different types of plastic are due to the varied structure of the monomer units. So we'll just go back for a second, and you can see that although they generally look quite similar, that they've all got small differences in their chemical arrangement. And so this actually results in the slightly different properties in the end result of that plastic material. So here's an example, polyvinyl chloride, one that you may or may not have heard of. It's often simply called PVC, an abbreviation of that. So you can see sort of top left there's the vinyl chloride, the monomer. It's one link of that chain. It hasn't yet joined up. And just to the right of that is actually a little graphical representation of what that sort of looks like. Just below that, you can see the polyvinyl chloride, the polymer. All those units have now joined together to form this repeating long chain. And then very large on the right there, you can see a larger graphical representation of what that's like. All these chains long, they've all joined together. And then those chains also interact with each other to form this sort of endless solid. So, theoretically, if this is what plastics, or you can imagine this is what plastics are like if you were able to sort of zoom in and view them on that level. The other key thing we've got here is, as you'll notice, a little symbol in the middle there. It has number 3 and also has that PVC indicating that it's this type of plastic. Now, you may have seen some of these before. There we go, number 3, fitting into this range of 1 through 7, also with labels. Now, I know there's a couple of those mic cubes floating around. My question to you, does anyone know what these symbols are called? If you do, put your hand up and prepare to have a mic cube thrown at you. Anyone? Guesses also welcome. Have a go.
They ever show what type of plastic it is? So
They are indeed.
so that's the point of the cycle. So when we into that and sort them out,
Definitely, perfect, great, awesome. Correct on all fronts. And what I'm looking for is the name. What is the name of these? What are they called?
I was going to say the strength of the plastic. So as it goes down, that's from 7 to 1, it degrades in quality.
They do have some, those numbers definitely do have somewhat of an order, but it's not in relation to strength, I'm sorry. Anyone else?
Is it like the plastic recycling index or something?
Ooh, you're close. You're definitely close. So these symbols are actually called RIC symbols, and that stands for resin identification codes. And as was very correctly pointed out, this is basically a labeling system used by reprocessors of plastic to tell apart the most popular plastics, labeled 1 to 6, from the rest. It may often, seem a bit more complicated than that, but that's basically what it comes down to. The most used plastics, labeled 1 through 6, and generally are used the most and therefore have the most viability for recycling, and the rest, labelled as 7, have much more infrequent use, and therefore are sort of just lumped into this other category. We're not necessarily going to consider them or even bother with them. Cool. So I've kind of now tackled a little bit about what plastic is, the RAC symbol system, but we still. Like, how does plastic come to be, right? It comes out of the ground, maybe natural resources, whatever. So we know that they're sort of hydrocarbon molecules, right? They've got this basic, spine of carbon surrounded by hydrogen atoms. And basically, the way that we create this plastic is by slightly altering other molecules that are quite similar. So on the left here, we've got both an octane molecule and an ethanol molecule. And you can see that they kind of both look like plastics. We've already established ethanol molecule right at the start. That's not a plastic, that's an alcohol, but it is very similar. So this is the concept, basically how we get this end result of plastic. Is you take a molecule that's very similar and you change it slightly to create that molecule. It's sort of like a lazy way of creation really, but it actually works out to be quite efficient in the long run. So these molecules, the previous two examples we looked at, one was called octane. You might have heard that word before, sort of vaguely associated with some kind of oil, fuel, maybe gas. And it's very correct. It's a very popular molecule that's in crude oil. So oil is by far the most common and cheapest source of hydrocarbons for making plastic. The second most common, which is by far the second most common, 98% of all plastic matter is made from oil, is basically some kind of plant matter. In this case, that's a picture of sugarcane. Most importantly, functionally and aesthetically, the source of hydrocarbons in making plastic is irrelevant, regardless of whether you make plastic out of oil, plant matter, or whatever else you manage to get your hands on. That doesn't result in a different chemical structure for the plastic, and the actual plastic that comes out the end, same color, same function, same everything. The actual source material for that is quite irrelevant in that sense. So then on to plastic manufacturing. So say you're a manufacturer and you've bought this raw material as plastic. It'll look a little bit like that sort of pile of little blue speckles on the left there. Now they don't come standard blue. Of course, plastic can be a variety of colors. This is just an example. In fact, plastic comes clear. But often when manufacturers order it, depending on their position, they might order it as a clear plastic and color it themselves, or they might be ordering it as a colored one. That really depends. But basically, the quite simple concept involved in plastic manufacturing is you take this raw material, this plastic, colored or not, and you apply some heat and pressure in a very specific way to then produce your product. Now, some of you may have some hands-on experience at some point in your life. Basically, you might have accidentally taken a heat gun or a hairdryer to a bit of plastic, and you see like, oh, shit, it becomes all soft and bendy, and it's now warped a little bit, and then it hardens again, and it keeps that new shape. This is basically the concept that manufacturers, use with plastic as well. They take this raw material, they apply some heat. And so while that plastic's no longer a solid, it's a semi-liquid, they then mold that into shape with pressure to form the plastic product. These can look, very different. A milk bottle in this example is manufactured using a process often called blow molding. Basically, you're wanting to form this hollow shape. It's a container. It's got lots of air in the middle. And so if you imagine blowing a bubble, but much more controlled, and instead of bubble material, you're using plastic. Now, of course, we've talked about manufacturing, and what about recycling? That's end of life of product potentially. So we're going to keep this very high level, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but basically, yes, it's possible for used and broken plastic products to be physically chipped or broken down, and that material used again in manufacturing. So unlike other materials, like for example, organic food, when you eat it and there's food scraps and or, you've changed that material, especially when it comes out the other end. Plastic is quite different, as a product, you might use it, but actually you're not really consuming it as such. And so a milk bottle, an example, the milk inside is actually what's being consumed, and the plastic doesn't change at all. And so that makes it highly suitable to actually be reused in different ways, one of which can be recycling. So this example, you can see that milk bottle might just be chipped back up again. Again, color of the plastic material doesn't really matter, and then produced into another product. One thing of particular to note here, certainly in this example shows it really well. I put up a little glass crate there, which indeed I believe it is. Most of them are made from milk bottles, recycled milk bottles. But you may or may not know that actually a milk bottle, mostly due to food and safety regulations and standards, etc. A milk bottle is not able to actually go back and make a milk bottle, mostly because plastic material, once it's been used, it comes into contact with lots of other materials, often organic, and especially in this case of a milk bottle, we don't actually have robust enough processes to take every single particle of that milk or anything else that's touched that plastic in order to make it safe enough to be made into a new milk bottle that is then again contacting all of those new particles of food or organic matter. So I hope that was not too fast-paced for you, and you got a wee bit gained from that. Here's just a summary of basically what we've gone over so far. Plastics are polymers, chain molecules made from repeating monomer units. That is basically the most important classification when you're looking at plastics as a material. Most plastics behave similarly and have shared, often useful properties. Plastic is made from sources of similar hydrocarbons. These are mostly found in oil. RIC symbols are a labeling method used to separate different plastics. Plastic products can be manufactured with the application of heat and pressure. And finally, plastic material can be reused to manufacture subsequent products via recycling. So with all of this, you'd think I was, advertising the next new fantastic material, for the future, but obviously it's already in your society, it's already used, and we actually know a lot of the consequences from the way that we use it so far, most of which aren't that great. So the problem with plastic, the many that there are, just to name a few, the majority of plastic products produced are designed to be single use. I'm sure given the self-explanatory nature of that term single use, you can sort of gather what that means and why that's sort of not ideal. You for example, a milk bottle, maybe it lasts for tops a week and then it gets chucked out. That's not a very long life cycle. And especially if that product, i.e. milk bottle, didn't have much value, if any value to start with, it's very unlikely to go around and then for that material to be reused again, especially considering the challenges in actually decontaminating that material and taking all the other contaminants out of it. Current recycling systems recapture only around, or maybe at most, 10% of used plastic. This pretty much applies worldwide to almost all types of plastics and products. There is a plastic pollution epidemic in most places around the world, mostly because of this lack of ability to recapture any of that plastic use, but more importantly, because we sort of have a culture and entire industry built around making plastic products that are mostly single use and or involved in packaging. The plastics industry aims to keep increasing how much plastic is made. So obviously with such a widespread industry and at such scale, they make a dime out of this, out of producing plastic. Plastic, they might buy plastic as a raw material, for example, it could be as low as $1 or $1.50 a kilogram. And, for example, a milk bottle that might be 50 grams in weight, they're able to produce 20 milk bottles, which they could sell for up to 50 cents each, from $1 or $1.50 worth of material. Now, maths certainly isn't my specialty, but that's quite a good markup, and especially considering pretty much all of their machines are fully automated. They can really keep all the costs very low. The production of plastics supports global fossil fuel production. So basically, we know the plastics market is massive. The global oil market is even bigger and is one of the biggest markets in the world. In fact, plastics actually occupies around 8% of that market, which of course is really propping up all the companies that are continuing to explore for fossil fuels, dig them up and burn them. And lastly, which we didn't really touch on, but microplastics. Of course, some of you may or may not be aware of these, what they are, and the effect that they have on various organic systems and people. They have this ability to cause human health complications, a lot of which we don't know about and won't know about for a long time because they're very long-term effects. So you get the picture. There's quite a few negative things involved with the systems, but we're through all the black and white stuff now, most of the nerdy stuff, and I want to talk to you more about a concept you're probably not quite familiar with: circular economy. So this is sort of the second half of the presentation. We're talking plastics, now we're talking circular economy. So basically, circular economy is a model of an economy inspired by nature. It's a model of production and consumption which involves sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, and recycling existing materials and products for as long as possible. Crucially, it's a system without waste. So if you imagine any natural system, all the parties involved with it, all the materials, be they as large as a blue whale or as small as a plankton, every single cycle and material that's used, there is no waste. Nature has existed for millions, billions of years before we came along, and it doesn't have any landfills anywhere that waste goes, some dirty corner that they put all their used material. Every organism and user of the system is able to use the output of other users as the input for themselves. And so that is basically the very high level overview of what a circular economy is: a system without waste because it mimics nature. So a couple of examples here, not that you really need them. To start off really simple, we've got one that involves trees, dead leaves that come from the trees, and then a material called humus, which is basically the very layer of topsoil formed by those leaves, falling on the ground and then degrading. So trees, once they lose their leaves, seasonally or otherwise, they fall onto the ground, degrade into this humus, which can then be used by trees and or other plants, materials, animals, etc. To continue to grow. On the right here, we've got a somewhat more complicated example of a food chain within some kind of marine system. So this is a fair bit more complex than the little system on the right, and especially this one, if you imagine that, extrapolated millions, billions over all of the earth and all of the different spheres that are involved. Circular economies can be very, very complex, and none more so than nature's own systems. When you think about achieving no waste and across all of these many parties and throughout that length of time, that's an incredible achievement, one that we can't even begin to match. But that's what a circular economy is all about, basically taking those principles and design of that system, and especially for us to try to apply it. So the circular economy is based on three main principles driven by design. So number one, eliminating waste and pollution. So nature, again, has no waste, no pollution. Every output is an input for something else. Second of all products are circulated, same with the materials, and crucially at their highest level of value. So again, there's no sort of even gradual decline in sort of the state or usability of materials in nature. There's no landfill, there's nothing like that. Every material is able to be used as it is, and what's produced from that, is something that is of equal value and is still able to go on to feed into other systems, even after it's been used, died, etc. And third of all, the regeneration of nature. Of course, this whole ecosystem, even if one part of it sort of goes down, there's lots of things that are reliant on that. And so all systems self-balance and take care of each other and regenerate where necessary. Ultimately, a circular economy decouples economic activity from the consumption of finite resources. It's a resilient system that is good for business, people, and the environment. Cool. So to sort of visualize a little bit of this complexity, here is a what's called a butterfly diagram of a circular economy. So I'll go through and sort of explain a few features of this broadly. On the left, we've got sort of cycles of biological material. So you think wood, cotton, organic food that we might eat and its scraps, etc. All of those sort of things. Basically, any material that will biodegrade. On the right, we've got what are called technical materials. So these are materials that are generally not naturally occurring, such as glass, metals, certainly in the form that we know and use them, and plastics. So there's sort of two unsaid rules of this diagram in relation to those two materials. Number one is that you don't inseparably mix biological materials with technical materials. It's all fine to use them together or alongside each other, but you don't want to be going and making a composite material which not only doesn't biodegrade, but can't be recycled or reused in the same way technical materials are. That defeats the purpose of their individual uses and properties. And number two, somewhat similarly, is that you don't want to be mixing inseparably two different technical materials. So if you think of the way glass is used and recycled and the way that metal might be used and recycled, if we create a composite material of between the two, not only do you lose those individual properties, but then you can't either put it down the sort of the glass hole or the metal hole in terms of how you're able to deal with it and keep that material in circulation for future use. Right. Now, with our technical materials, there's quite a few bubbles that sort of branch out in various cycles for that loop. So this generally follows the sort of priority of the waste hierarchy. Hands up if you've heard of the waste hierarchy before. Cool. If you, nice. So basically at the top, as shown very well in this diagram, is sharing, maintaining, and prolonging materials. Especially within a circular economy, that is the most important thing that can happen. If you've got a tool, a car, some kind of device, even if you still use it, it can still be useful to you, but especially if it's not, the best way to continue for that to be able to be in circulation at its highest value is for it to be shared, for somebody else to be able to use it. Second down the line, we've got reuse and redistribution. So again, can be a somewhat similar example, even if, and especially if it has no longer use to you. This could be the same with other organizations, councils, government, any kind of resource that's no longer useful in its current state to that party. There's often another party that could use it in that exact same state, and all it needs is some reuse and redistribution. Third down the line, refurbishing and remanufacturing. You might have something that's slightly broken. It might need a small part of it repaired, or might be a bit of metal that needs welding back together, say. You get the picture. And fourth, and most crucially, is recycling, which certainly might seem a bit unintuitive. A lot of the goal for certainly councils and governments these days, we want to provide more recycling opportunities. It's all about recycling. There's products at the end of life. We need to provide opportunities for them to go on and do something else, right? But actually, the most important thing in the circular economy is quite far from that. It's actually creating products and systems that don't need to be recycled in the first place. So actually recycling of a particular product, or the need for it to be recycled, is not seen as an advantage, it's a disadvantage. So here's sort of bringing all of this together a little bit. Here's 5 ways a circular economy will change how we use plastic. So number 1, the number of single-use plastic products will drastically decrease. If you imagine right now that all the water bottles, the plastic water bottles, suddenly became absolute, basically, well, similar to like this, designed to be highly reusable. None of them were single-use. And there was also all the systems for them to be decontaminated, reused, and shared around amongst everyone. As of that instant, we wouldn't need any more plastic to make those water bottles. That role for and need of water bottles would be fulfilled indefinitely. And that could be applied for many products in many different situations. And therefore, within a circular economy, the actual number of single-use plastic products will drastically decrease if there is any. Secondly, the amount of new plastic created will drastically decrease. Of course, if we're valuing this plastic material that we already have, it's already been dug up, been refined, etc., we're going to keep using that and retain it in circulation for as long as possible. Manufacturers and or refiners that are creating this new plastic are just not going to have the need for any new plastic. There won't be demand for it. Number 3, the number of different types of plastic used will be minimized. So if we take a step back again and look at nature as a system and the way it uses its different materials, take one very simple material, water. H2O is absolutely everywhere. Almost every organism and every material on the planet uses water or its individual elements in some way to make itself work or function. They basically have an invisible shared language across all life on the planet. And that makes it, one of the reasons it makes it very easy for nature to convert different materials for different uses and for them to break down and be reused in different ways. So as best we can, we want to do this within plastics as well. So instead of, having research and innovation going into producing newer and more specific kinds of plastic, we actually want to re-innovate ways to use the same current types of plastics and the same plastic itself and keep that in circulation. 4 is the use of soft plastic will be much less common. So the use of soft plastic is most commonly associated with single-use plastic products. And as of point 1, the use of these will drastically decrease, as will the use of soft plastic. And number 5, plastic recycling will be used only as a last resort when needed. So as per the circular economy diagram we saw in the last slide, recycling is not at all a top priority. Quite the opposite. It's end of the line. This is what we use when we really can't do anything else with this material, as opposed to high priority for councils, governments, etc. Cool, we're just going to wrap through a few more of these. Boom, boom, boom. Cool, so you've learned all about this now. Here's 5 ways you can support the emergence of a circular economy. Ultimately, it might be a bit simplistic to point out, but a system with no waste, especially when it comes to plastic, is a system that doesn't create any pollution. So a circular economy, not only means that it doesn't create any plastic pollution, but quite the opposite. It starts to suckle that up as well. As you saw in an earlier slide, one of the 3 important design principles for a circular economy is that it regenerates nature. So number 1, and this is personally the one I find most boring, is basically you're influencing political, legislative, and organizational change. This basically means that you can be emailing, calling up, speaking to any of the sort of leaders in council, government, or any other company or organization and telling them, you really value a circular economy. You want to see less plastic pollution and you want to see this happen through the creation of a circular economy. Second of all is basically learning more about circular economy. Obviously, if you really want to be feel empowered to talk about this topic and share and influence this change, you sort of, at least a little bit, needs to sort of know a bit more about the concept. So, I'm feel very privileged to be able to share this with you today and hopefully introduce this concept to your lives. But ultimately, to make a bigger change, it's great to know a bit more about it. Quite related to that is talking more about circular economy. So you've all got friends, I hope you do at least, same with parents, teachers, etc. And yeah, like one of the ways to not only learn about circular economy as a topic and help, really, create climate action, and especially that around reducing plastic pollution, is to basically talk about it. Any topic that needs to gain momentum or movements that do, you just want it out there more. And talking about it is the most simplistic and easiest way you can do about it. I challenge you all, tomorrow and throughout at least sometime next week, just talk to someone about circular economy, even if it's simple as, hey, on the weekend, heard this guy talking about circular economy. Like, have you heard of that before? Like, what do you think about it? This, again, somewhat related, you can champion circular economy in your workplace and school. Ultimately, as a member of any organization, you're a valued part of that community. and you can make your voice known, and that, you're in support of a circular economy, and you want to see your organisation also supporting that. And lastly, sharing on organisations that are already growing our circular economy. So as we'll just flick through back to the circular economy diagram for a second, you can see that sharing, maintaining, prolonging, reusing, all those activities, that are up the top of that hierarchy, a lot of them are actually already happening. In fact, if those cubes are around, can anyone give me a cool local example of a business that is involved in either sharing, maintaining, or reuse a system, material, a product, anything? Name a business. You got a cube? Thank you.
Hi, Cycle, Urban Farm, Newtown.
Yes, amazing example. Yeah, Kai Cycle, Urban Farm in Newtown. They go around and they basically collect food scraps, organic material, which they then turn into compost. And that compost is then used to grow food on site, which then goes out and feeds a lot of the community. Perfect example. Anyone else?
Yay! Eyeball?
Yes, Kibosh, another one. Food related, Kibosh Food Rescue basically goes around and collects any excess food from businesses, supermarkets, cafes, and then redistributes that to those that need it. Another great example, that one in particular, really covers a lot of those, sharing, redistribution, but also reuse technically.
The Sustainability Trust, they do a lot, but I think one really good thing is collecting old electronics and redistributing it to businesses that break those into smaller components.
Yeah, indeed. Another great example. Sustainability Trust, absolutely sustainability legends here in the city. And as you mentioned, they do a whole variety of activities that probably cover all of these right from the top to the bottom of that, of those priorities. Cool. So yeah, all of that, to say like supporting the emergence of a circular economy is mostly about influencing wider systems change. And it doesn't require any monetary investment, and it certainly, almost does require you to not actually, be very aware about your position within the system, unless most of the change in terms of the decisions made to move towards a circular economy are made by individuals very high up in organisations, especially those in council, government, and or other very large organisations. You're not, well, I assume most of you aren't in those sort of positions. If you are, I'm also speaking to the right crowd. So basically, using some and or all of these, you can really help leverage the transition of our current position, colloquially referred to as a linear economy, one where we take, make, and waste materials and products to a circular economy, where all those materials are indefinitely reused, redistributed, shared around, and one where there is no waste and no plastic pollution. So, as I mentioned at the start, my name's Darcy. I'm the founder and operations manager of the Tiny Plastic Factory. And now I'll just explain very briefly a little bit about what we do. Now that I've explained a few sort of concepts around plastic and circular economy, you might be able to understand this a little bit better. Tiny Plastic Factory is a social enterprise founded with the purpose to accelerate the transition of the New Zealand plastics industry toward a circular economy. So just like those tips I shared with you in the last slide about how we can help create the circular economy, this is what we're all about specifically for plastics though. So we help organisations in transitioning to a circular economy through product and systems development, manufacturing, product lifecycle management, and consulting. Cool. All right. I'm very aware we're maybe a little bit over time, but I want to open up the floor for questions, get those mic cubes bouncing around.
I do get how you said about the oil is the main thing that they
Do you want to just put that right up to your mouth? Thank you.
How they turn oil into plastic? Like, how come they use that? Is it just because of the raw amount they can get? Or
Good question. So first of all, the scale of the oil industry is massive. You know, the plastics industry is massive, and all of the plastic produced only actually, you know, as I said, is about 8% of the oil market. So it truly is really colossal. So not only does it need a really big source, but they actually also mostly use oil because it's the cheapest, because it's so widely produced and, you know, dug up, pumped up out of the ground. The unit price of oil, in addition to sometimes being subsidized by governments and the like, just because there's so much of it around and the scale of the industry is so massive, it is basically just the cheapest and easiest available source of hydrocarbons to make plastic from. Hey.
Hi. Oh, okay.
Make sure you shove that right up in your mouth.
Hi. Okay, so I got the face. You know how you said like you can make it from oil or plants, but it produces like the same result?
Yes.
Would you say that like plants is a better way though, because it doesn't include like deep sea, like, you know, that stuff?
Mm-hmm. So two things there. I'll directly answer your question in the second part. So first of all, if you think of a circular economy, we actually have so much plastic that is not only already out there in use, but even that's sitting in landfills, in our oceans, which some of which is already starting to be sort of like regathered and reused. Ultimately, we don't actually need any more sources, whether it be from oil plants or anywhere else. We've actually got as much plastic as we need to fulfill ourselves within a circular economy already. We don't need it produced from anywhere. But to directly answer your question, making plastic from plants on paper, yes, is slightly better than oil. Not only does it not support that oil industry, which is obviously a massive contributor to climate change, but making it from plants, yeah, does also sort of support, you know, land use for, you know, actually growing organic material as opposed to, you know, slapping oil rigs and the like on it as well. So a marginal gain at best, really, you know, like that, especially companies that will use and advertise the use of, you know, oh, we made our plastic from plants and this, it's mostly just used as sort of like a marketing ploy. Ultimately, you know, when you're looking at that situation, just think like, well, those aren't the only two sources for sure. In fact, we don't really need any new sources at all.
I got two questions that probably quite easy to answer.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was the numbers on the plastic. Not all plastics actually come with that little symbol on it. Is there a reason for that?
To put it simply, no, there's not a reason, or that the reason is simply because there's no mandatory regulation around it. You know, if something's produced from plastic, there's guidelines at best to say, you know, maybe you could put a number on it. Maybe it could be of a readable size if we're lucky. Otherwise, yeah.
And my second question is, you talked about the circular in the butterfly diagram, not wanting to mix the two sides.
Yep, technical and biological materials.
Is an example of that sort of like the plant-based compostable bags that they say not to put in the compost?
Yes, somewhat. That's a little bit of a more complicated one maybe, but a really easy one would be Tetra Pak cartons. So they're not only made of plastic, and they've got paper, cardboard in there, and also like a metal or foil layer in there. So, you know, at least one biological material and at least two technical materials in it that will sandwich together, very hard to separate, and ultimately produces a material that, you know, doesn't at all, you know, get circulated in any way.
Thanks.
Last one, two more.
If plant-based plastic is so like chemically similar to
Identical, in fact.
as normal plastic, does that affect how well it decomposes?
Yeah, great question. So there's a very important difference there between, I guess, where the plastic comes from and then its ability to biodegrade, right? And so, yeah, as established, yeah, like where plastic is sourced from, you know, where those hydrocarbons come from, are relevant to how that plastic actually performs and the chemical structure of that. So the biodegradability or degradability in general of plastics is related to the structure of the plastic as opposed to the source material. So there are various plastics, often sometimes greenwashingly so referred to as bioplastics or the like. You know, that do have some ability to biodegrade or at least degrade faster than most conventional or general use plastics. But those two things aren't related at all. Where the source material for the plastic came from doesn't have any bearing on that plastic's ability to biodegrade or not.
So you know, you talked about the circular.
Sorry, do you want to just put that a little bit closer? Thank you.
So you know how you talked about the circular economy?
Yes.
Why do you think a lot of big companies are not actually following that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this generally sort of speaks to most human systems and change in general. You know, like we resist change. It's inconvenient, but also more so, you know, we've got very well established systems of production for all of society and all materials and all products. And to change that takes quite a lot of time. So there actually are, as you guys demonstrated, you know, already local businesses even that are adopting circular economy principles and practices, and very much so increasing and growing their businesses from using them, but ultimately to, you know, see that change happen, and especially to make it happen in a time frame that, you know, really matters. We just need to push for that to happen faster. So it is happening, but, you know, to have that change happen at a, you know, rate that is actually going to make things significantly better, say within our lives. Yeah, it's basically we need to really help make that change.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome. No worries. Thank you, Tim. Also, just one more thing quickly. In addition to how well you answered that first question, I was quite surprised. Yeah, it's great to see so many young people coming along to events like this and getting involved. I remember certainly, I'm 24. When I was in high school, like sustainability or climate change, like I kind of knew about it, but it wasn't at all an interest of mine. Certainly it was as well after I left high school that even started becoming any kind of passion for me or something that I, you know, really wanted to create change about. So it's awesome seeing all of you guys, whether you're high school age or even a little bit older or even older than me, doesn't really matter. Like, you know, keep fighting the good fight, and you're all legends.